Beth and I have got these 2 grandbabies in our lives, and we've got a 3rd one on the way. And if you're a new grandparent, you know how awesome that is. My whole life, I had people tell me, well, wait till you get grandkids. They're awesome, and they are awesome, man. And this is our first Easter with these 2 guys. We've got a 3rd one on the way here in July. And when I was thinking about what their parents were going to experience this first Easter, it got me thinking about Easter when I was a kid. And when I was growing up, there were 2 sides of Easter. On the one hand, there was the candy side, right? Like I was down for the candy side. You can look at me and go, yeah, I believe that. You were the guy that was down. There were the Easter baskets, there were the egg hunts, all the different kinds of chocolate. And back in the day, Easter chocolate was different than the chocolate you got every other time of year. There were only certain things that you could get at Easter. I think about like Cadbury eggs. You got any Cadbury folks in the room? A few of you, yeah. Hey, I'm down, man, you do you. But they were never really worth it to me because you got to fight through the foil. If you're doing an egg hunt on a warm Easter and it starts to melt, they just become a total mess. Peeps, we got any Peeps people in the room? Yeah. You boys down for the Peeps. As an adult, I'm down for the Peeps. I love a good 3-4 pack. I've got a friend, she passed away this time last year, and she shared an affinity with Peeps, and every year she would bring me just a little small pack of them, and we would kind of celebrate that together. And I've discovered over the years there's actually multiple layers of Peep lovers. There are those that like them fresh, and then there are those that like them a little crusty, right? I'm on the crusty side of Peeps. I know it may seem gross to some of y'all, but like when she would bring me a pack, and she did it seasonally too, right? Because Peeps, you can get them anytime you want them now. So every major holiday, she would show up with a little 4-pack of Peeps. I would poke a hole in them and leave them on my desk for like 3 or 4 days. Let that sugar get crispy. So it kind of, oh man, I'd be down for that right now, as a matter of fact. Probably the most iconic Easter candy, though, bar none, cross generations. It's got to be the chocolate Easter bunny, right? You can't get those just any time of year. On principle, I'm down for that too. It's not so much the case now as it used to be when I was a kid, but back then, the great disappointment in an Easter bunny is when you bit into it and it was hollow. Because like you thought you were getting a brick of chocolate and you bite into it and the whole thing just falls apart. It would have been so much more worth it if it was filled with something. But my point is that the chocolate was something I got to do on Easter. The problem was, to get to the chocolate, there was something I had to do first. And what I had to do was go to church. My folks were like, look, you can have all the candy you want. Just wear it out after we go to church. That meant we had to all get up. We had to all get dressed. You had to wear clothes on that day you didn't wear any other time of the year. If you're like me and you grew up in the 70s and 80s, it was like dress socks, dress shorts, tie, can't get dirty at all because there's pictures to be taken. So we do all that. We'd all sit together on a row, everybody would be in their place. And then my brother and I have a brother that's 3 years older than me, we would be threatened within an inch of our life when we walked in the church. We would be told, if you two don't keep it together, then there's no candy after church. Now, I grew up Baptist. If you grew up Baptist, you know what I'm about to say. When you go to a Baptist church, you're not only held accountable by your parents, you're held accountable by any adult who's sitting within arm reach of you. And so every Easter, I had no idea where it was coming from. My brother was a jerk. He's still a jerk. And he was going to always be the one starting something, and you never knew where the hand was coming from or whatever. And so I had this cloud hanging over my church experience when I was a kid. And I don't know kind of where you were or where you might be today, but I didn't really get the faith side of things when it comes to Easter. To me, that felt like a have to. But the candy side of it, that was a get to. I suspect some of us are here today, and if you were honest, this feels like the have to side of Easter for you. Maybe you have come to keep somebody happy. Maybe you're here because that's what your mom wanted. And listen, whatever your mama wants, your mama's going to get, even if you're 45 years old. Maybe you're here because it's a tradition, right? It's Easter. This is what we do. It's a part of our experience every year. Maybe you're just kind of holding out for the candy or the meal or the hang time with your family. And if that's you, I want you to know I totally get that. It took me quite a few years to figure out the faith side of Easter. When I was 15 years old, that's when things began to change for me. I was at a point in my life, even at 15, where no matter where I went or what I did, whether it was athletics or hanging out with friends or even being with my family, there was something inside of me that I always felt like I was on the outside. And even though I was surrounded by friends, there were a lot of days where I felt like I was completely isolated and by myself. I could be in a room full of 1,000 people and I would feel like I was the only person on the face of the earth. And maybe it's part of just being 15 years old, but even at 15, there was like this nagging thing deep down in my soul. It's like I just couldn't find any level of real satisfaction. I didn't have any real answers. I didn't know what to do. And I'd been through all the stuff, right? Like I knew all the things about Christianity, but to me, it was just sort of a thing you got to do. And so one day, because I didn't know what else to do, I got down on my knees and I asked God for help. Like legitimately, I was like, God, I need your help. I cannot do this on my own. I don't have the answers that I'm looking for. And I wish I could tell you that in that moment, I had like this really cool kind of Hollywood spiritual experience where like the ceiling rolled back or angels flooded the room or even that I heard God's voice audibly. You know, like if God were speaking right now, I'd be like, hey, Stephen, nice shirt, right? Like I didn't get any of that. But you know what I did get for the first time in my life? Just straight up legit. It was the first time in my life I didn't feel like I was completely alone. And at 15, I walked into a church for the first time on my own terms. Not because somebody made me show up, because I wanted to give it a shot on my own. And what I found behind the doors of that church was a group of people who loved me and accepted me and prayed for me and encouraged me. And I'm going to go to my grave saying that God used the church to save my life. I am not just the pastor of a church. I am a product of the church. And I know there are a lot of you guys are too. Listen, I am the product of a group of people who actually believed that the Easter message is real. That Jesus was God incarnate, that God made a conscious decision to take on human clothes, that he lived and died and rose again, and believed that today he can guide and lead and change our lives in ways that we could never hope for or possibly imagine on our own. And I am still crazy enough to believe just that. And all I've really wanted to do since I was 15 years old is just try to help as many people as possible come to know the grace and the love and the forgiveness and the second chances that God gave me. It's just one beggar trying to lead another beggar to bread. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm hoping that some of us experience that today. That's it. That's my only hope, is that you not just feel good about your experience at church, but that maybe some of us will hear for the first time or the 1 millionth time that God loves you and that God's forgiveness is freely offered to you and that you can step into a new life right now today. I want to look at just a part of the Easter story, and I know especially those of us that grew up in the South and we've been to church before, we know the Easter story. It's Luke chapter 24. We're going to pick it up in verse 5. By the time we get to this point in the gospel narrative, Jesus has been crucified. That was on Friday. And then there was kind of this chaos yet silence of Saturday where not much happened. And now it's Sunday morning. And there's a group of women who are going to the tomb to prepare Jesus' body for burial because that's what the tradition of the day required to be done. And so they get there and the large stone that they assumed would be rolled in front of the tomb, it was suddenly rolled away. And so that was their first clue that something significant had happened, because you don't just show up and roll a giant rock away from a hole in the ground. And so they walk into the tomb and there's these two guys there, and Luke, who was an eyewitness of this moment, later sits down and writes, and the only way he can describe them is to say they're in like dazzling clothes, right? which is weird. Like, okay, there's two dudes in dazzling clothes, cool. No, it's his way of saying this is so unusual and there's something so disruptive about this moment. There's this incredible thing, the stone's gone. There's these two men standing there who should not have been standing in the tomb. And then here's how Luke captures the shock of that moment. It says the women were terrified and bowed down with their faces to the ground. Then the men ask, why are you looking among the dead for someone who is, what's that word? Alive. Can we say it together? Alive. He isn't here, he is risen from the dead. I would argue that one simple word, alive, that, my friends, is the game changer. Every generation tends to have a seminal moment that changes that generation forever. I think about all the kids who were in middle school or high school the year that Columbine happened. Some of us were alive then. And how over the course of the next couple of years, that would reshape the educational experience literally for tens of millions of kids. Because it was no longer just showing up to school. There were other things you had to start doing, and our kids and our grandkids are still doing those same things to try to protect themselves in the event of something like that happening. There's no doubt about it that completely, radically changed that generation. I think about those kids that were alive or born right around 9/11 and how the whole concept of safety changed. I think about the kids that had to go through COVID. None of us who are alive have ever been through something like that, and to have to try to figure out how do we navigate our way through a global pandemic, like what is that, right? And we all remember those days, and here we are 4.5 years later, and it's like nothing has really changed. The feelings and experiences that people had, they're gonna be with a lot of us for the rest of our lives. Well, 1991 was a pivotal year that changed my generation's worldview. If you're a part of Generation X, you'll remember this moment. And my kids make fun. They're like, you were born in the 1900s, dude. Yeah, I was, 1900s. Jerks. 1991. I'll never forget that night that the story broke. That was the year that Iraq invaded a neighboring small country of Kuwait. And I was in my senior year at UT Chattanooga, and when you go to a public university in particular, there's certain things they make you take. I almost think it's a way of just sort of filling up your schedule. And I waited till my senior year to take those classes because I knew they ultimately would not affect my degree. And so one of them was at night. I was already not looking forward to it. It was a night class. I was right at the end of my college career. I knew I was going on to seminary, and I felt things about having to go to this class. So I'm walking across the quad, and I noticed that there were like hundreds of other kids that were pouring into the student union, which was unusual for a night like that at a night class. And so I already didn't want to go to class. I wanted to blow it off, and I thought, well, this is a great excuse. Something must be going on. I'm going to go check it out and see what's going on. So I walk in, and literally everybody's standing there. You could hear a pin drop, and everybody's watching the TV. And there's a CNN reporter who's standing on top of a hotel. And in the background, you could hear all these sirens blaring, and the sky was filled with these flashes, and then there were these explosions, and I realized we were at war. And for the first time in my life, I knew that things were never gonna be the same again. Our generation did not experience war. Like it was something that we read about or heard about from our parents or our grandparents, but we didn't know what that was like. And then it was in the era, right, where cable news was coming out, and they were gonna embed, and you could see literally almost moment by moment what war was really like. And I remember standing there and I'm like, yo, man, this is some stuff right here. Thursday, February 28th of that year, for a guy named Cecil Carpenter and his ex-wife Ruth Dillow, that would be way more than just an ordinary day. They lived in a town of about 2,100 out on the panhandle of Kansas, and he worked at a sewage plant. And while he's working one day, the phone rings and it's like, Cecil, you got to get down to City Hall right now. On the other side of town, his ex-wife Ruth was working at the National Garment Company when somebody interrupted her and was like, yo, the boss needs to see you right now. You just got to stop and go. And so when he got to City Hall and she got to her boss's office, each of them encountered two people standing there. And they were in full military uniform. No words spoken, no expressions exchanged, not even a simple hello. And according to the LA Times, Ruth said they didn't have to say anything. When you see this, you just automatically expect the worst. And the worst is exactly what they got. The two men told them that the previous day, their 20-year-old son, Clay, had been killed in the same war that I had watched start just a few weeks earlier. And in an instant, their world went completely blank. In the article I was reading, Ruth, the mom, said, I know they talked about their regrets, but I just fell apart. He's dead. Those are the only words I remember them saying. She went on to talk about how over the next few days, they spent time with family, because that's what you're supposed to do. And over tears and quiet laughter, they just kind of shared stories with each other about their son. And as the hours passed, there would be a stream of friends and neighbors coming by, bringing casseroles and baked goods. Sympathy cards filled their mailbox. In the center of that town, like if you've been around a small town, somebody took a wooden plaque and draped it in a black cloth as a way of saying, as a community, you know, we understand the price that Clay has paid with his life. And I read that story, and I mean, like, can you imagine what that moment must have been like? Like, for those of us who are parents, I mean, try to put yourself in their shoes for just a few moments. Think about just the floodgate of emotion that must have poured out. Think about the heartbreak, right? That sense of loss. Like, all of us have stayed up late, especially if you got teenagers, and you're just hoping that your phone doesn't ring. Imagine that by times about 1 million. Imagine the guilt of all the things that must be rushing through your mind, the things that you wish you had said. Maybe it's been a while since you said to your son or daughter, you know what, I love you. Like, you can go weeks and months. Some of us go years and we never speak those words. And when you get news like that, I wonder just the guilt of what you wish you had said, or just that deep longing to see his face, or the ability to wrap your arms around your child, just wishing that you could even get one more nose full of their smell, right? You know how your kid smells. It's different than every other child on the planet. And to know that all of that is gone. In a word, they felt despair. Despair means to lose hope. It's to be overcome by a sense of defeat. It's the feeling that everything is wrong and nothing is going to ultimately turn out right. It's that moment you become convinced that, man, my best days are behind me, and what I got out in front of me, I don't know how many more of those there are, but there's no way they're going to be anything like this. It's that moment that you become stuck. It feels like the clock stops and you're frozen in time. Reality is, this family did not have the corner of the market on despair. Throughout human history, we finite human beings have had to struggle with despair. You may be there right now. I would argue the entire Easter story is actually filled with despair. The disciples began the week on top of the world. They thought that they were literally seeing the culmination of a lifelong dream coming to fruition right before their very eyes. You and I've got the ability to look back on history, right? We can read about the story. We get all the details. They didn't have all the details. They were convinced that Jesus was the Messiah that they'd been hearing about since they were little kids sitting on their grandparents' lap on the front porch. Their whole life long, they would have heard about how God's going to raise up a Messiah, and then Jesus shows up, and they think, this is it. This guy is who we've been waiting for. They got to listen to him teach, and they watched him perform miracle after miracle. And I'm not talking about some TV preacher slap him on the head, watch him fall out kind of miracle. I'm talking about straight up legit. Eyes that can't see get touched and they're given sight back. Legs that don't work, that have never worked. Jesus would just say, get up, and those legs that never worked, they not only would go 1 foot in front of the other, but they could run and jump and skip their way through life. I'm talking about straight up legit miracles. And they'd seen the way that he stood up to the religious elite, because remember, it's not just Rome they were up against. They were up against church people who did not like Jesus showing up, taking part of their power. By the time they got to Jerusalem, they were expecting a coronation, and maybe they got it on that first day. But then very quickly, Jesus has got bread and he's got a cup and he's talking about his blood and his body, and maybe that's the moment they started to fall apart. They heard about how one among them would end up betraying Jesus. Still reeling from the news that Jesus was about to be betrayed, they rushed to the garden because that's where you went. You just tried to get away from the noise to catch your breath long enough to think, and Jesus is there. And then Judas. Judas shows up with the temple guard. It was Judas. He was one of them. He had bet the farm just like they did. And yet he betrayed him, and then he was arrested. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. There were these trumped up charges, and there was a mock trial, and Jesus was dragged before the most powerful person in their lives in that moment, Pilate. And then they stood there in utter shock as they watched him be flogged within an inch of his life. And you got to think in that moment, well, it can't get any worse than this. And yet it did. They strapped a cross on his back, and they led him through the streets and up a hill. And they all stood right there in horror as the nails were driven into his hands and feet. In total disbelief, they got to see, not just read about, but they got to see their Messiah breathe his last breath. And in an instant, they had to think, our best days are behind us. They felt despair. When you're in a time of despair, and when you are convinced that you've run out of options, or that you've expended your last resource and you don't know what else to do, it usually takes something pretty dramatic to begin to turn things around. According to the LA Times, for 3 days, Ruth Dillow dealt with the tragedy of her son's death. And for 3 days, the people that she loved the most did their best to try to console her. And for 3 days, nothing came close to helping her because the loss was too massive. In the midst of all the chaos and sorrow of that moment, the phone rang. And when Ruth answered, the voice on the other end simply said, "Mom, I'm alive." She told the reporter from the LA Times, "I couldn't believe it at first, but then I recognized his voice. He really was alive." She went on to say, "I laughed, I cried, I felt like turning cartwheels because my son, who I thought was dead, was really alive." Now, who among us could argue that that's not the best news that Ruth and her family could have ever received? Because in that moment, right, her sadness gets turned into joy. Her sorrow gets turned into celebration. Her despair gets turned into hope. And friends, I would argue that that is exactly what happened on Easter morning. The whole world thought that Jesus was dead. Every person following in his footsteps stood there as their dream shattered right before their very eyes. They were literally scared to death because they knew if the government and the church could do to Jesus what they did, then they could end up doing it to them. And they had given up all hope. And yet, just as he promised, on the third day, lungs started to fill with air. And life began coursing through his veins. And at just the right moment, the burial cloths came off, the stone was rolled away, and Jesus walked out of the tomb, conquering death so that you and I might have life. So make no mistake about it, friends. This event that we've gathered to celebrate, it's more than just a historical occurrence. I would argue it is the preeminent event that has changed not just a generation, but all of human history. The simple fact that the tomb is empty, it is God's way of showing us once and for all the depths of his love. It is God's attempt to say to ordinary sin-stained people like you and like me that there is no need to cave into despair. No matter how bad you might think your life is, and listen, some of us, our life is bad right now. No matter how bad you might have messed up, no matter how difficult the circumstance you're facing may be, no matter how far you think you have run, there is always room for hope. There is always reason to celebrate. There's always reason to have joy well up inside of your soul. So please don't you dare give in to the despair that I know is pressing in on a lot of us. Don't listen to those voices. telling you that your best days are behind you. The women show up, and they are stunned at what they see. So according to Luke, the men asked them, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He has risen from the dead." Friends, that's the message of Easter, that Jesus is alive. Which means if Jesus is alive, hope is alive. And if Jesus is alive, that means grace is alive, and forgiveness is alive, and purpose is alive, and meaning is alive, and it means that death has been conquered and evil has been defeated. It means that darkness has finally been overcome by light. It means that you and I have a purpose and a deeper meaning. If Jesus can rise up, that means that you can rise up. If Jesus is alive, that means that you and I can be fully alive right now in this moment on this Easter Sunday when you're feeling all the pressure you're feeling. The simple fact that the tomb is empty means there's hope for your life and my life. You don't have to give up. You don't have to give in. You don't have to cave to despair in your life. No. You can keep putting one foot in front of the other. In fact, you can walk out of this place with your chin a little bit higher than when you came in. You can stick your chest out. You can have some swagger about you. You can encounter life in a new way, a new possibility, a new sense of hope. This is not just an ordinary day, y'all. This is a rally cry to those of us who've said yes to Jesus, because there's more work to do. Now listen, for all the watchers in the room, 2 minutes, you're going to get out. 8 minutes early. Amen? Amen. Okay. So what's the point? Well, the point is this. In a room filled with this many people, some of us have been following in the footsteps of Jesus a long time. I get that. Please see today, not as just a moment of remembrance or celebration, but see it as rocket fuel for your soul. Because you're going to walk right out of this room and you're going to walk right face to face with life itself. So let it breathe life into you. Let it be a moment where we re-up together, that we're gonna be the people that God has called us to be. And listen, make no mistake, I've been hanging around this joint for 29 years. And I have seen God do some amazing things. And I am telling you, God ain't even close to being done with the people of Cokesbury Church. So use today as a call, right? When you go back to work, you go back to school, to roll up your sleeves, man, to get engaged, to let God's grace flow through your life, to be a conduit, to give somebody else hope. But if you're here today and you have not yet stepped across that line of faith, I need you to know something about our church. We are not the kind of church that tries to single people out, make you raise your hand or fill out a card. We're not going to chase you out of the building. We're not going to play 17 verses of a hymn until somebody responds. We believe that God is moving and working every moment of every day and every place that we go. And it is true that God is working exactly where you're sitting right now. And I know, listen, I've been doing it for years. There are a lot of people like me who unintentionally communicated that following Jesus is like the hardest thing that you could ever do. And maybe you sat and you listened to a lot of people just like that and you thought to yourself, this is way too hard. I can't do it. I learned when I was 15 years old that there is no magic formula, that you don't have to clean yourself up, that you don't have to say the right things, that all you got to do is just say, Jesus, come into my life. That's it. It's just Jesus, come into my life. If you've not yet stepped across that line of faith, man, I don't know of a better day to do it than today. Here's what I guarantee you will not happen. The sky will not burst wide open. Likelihood is angels will not gather around you. You may not even hear God speaking to you in this moment. But I can promise you, you'll start to feel like you're not alone. Because God is right there with you. Always has been, always will be. You may be thinking, well, Stephen, there's about 1 million things I need to say to God. I get that, man. None of us are perfect. No, you got the whole rest of your life. to have those conversations, but it always begins with Jesus, come into my life. I hope you make that decision today, because I think it will not only affect your life today and tomorrow, but I think it'll affect all the way until you step from this life into the next. Jesus, come into my life. I hope as you guys leave today, we've got one more song, and if you need to go, I get it, man. I don't want you to be late. I don't want to take the blame for that. But we're going to sing one more song, and listen, I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you get a chance to get outside, soak up some sunshine. I hope if you're going to an Easter egg hunt, you have an absolute blast. I hope if you're going to lunch that you will not have that family member there that just thinks, you know, Easter today, Easter, the resurrection, that's a great day to talk politics. I hope that person stays home and you don't have to encounter them. I hope that you find some joy today. I hope that you feel a new sense of, hey, the possibility of my life can be tremendous. I hope you leave this place with a smile on your face. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.